therapist, a psychologist, social worker, all these different things. But the actual makeup of the team varies from site to site. So that's something that's really important as parents or when you're referring into clinics. Knowing what the makeup of the teams at these different sites are very important. The one rule that early intervention has to make up a medical diagnostic clinic is that it has to be led by a physician. Okay, so it doesn't mean it has to be a developmental pediatrician. It doesn't mean it even has to be a pediatrician. It could be a neurologist, and there are some medical diagnostic clinics that we have run by neurologists or orthopedics or that are more like physical or motor disability type of clinics that you may want to go and refer into those. Or there are others that are more speech and language or all in between. And so that's important to know who's on the team, who's going to be assessing the child, and to know what the right fit is going to be. And so on my team that I have assembled, we have a developmental pediatrician, we have a speech and language pathologist, an occupational therapist. Sometimes we can add a physical therapist if the child warrants that, if they're getting physical therapy or there's a motor concern. And to do our cognitive assessments, we have either a psychologist or a social worker who has been trained in the cognitive instruments that we use in early intervention. So when medical diagnostic first was created, we didn't have this epidemic of autism and explosion of the prevalence in autism. So really they started this clinic because they were finding that our kids were coming to school with language delays and they were deaf and nobody knew. Or there were kids that were in a cerebral palsy in evolution that were not seen or followed by neurology. Things like that were kind of horrifying back then. But I know over time it has, and I will say a majority of the kiddos that we see in our clinic, the question is a rule out of autism. Is it autism, is it not, or something else? So that remains the number one question now, especially in the last 10 years since I've been in our clinics. And so we have worked hard to make the clinic a valid assessment for autism spectrum, among other things, but looking at our clinical tools that we use, the way that we evaluate the child, and will this stand up to insurance claim? Is this going to be a valid evaluation to be able to get the right services for the child? So that is sort of how the clinic has evolved over time. We don't only see kids for autism. That's also important to know. We see kids for a variety of communication issues or developmental or even just behavioral. We see a lot of kids with little stinker behavior, and that is interfering with their development. I tell my residents that are learning about our clinics that the medical diagnostic clinic is meant for children who are receiving early intervention therapies, and they may not be making the expected progress, and there's a presumption or a thought of there being an underlying developmental or an underlying diagnostic reason why that child may not be making the appropriate progress. And so an evaluation may help identify that and get the child the proper services they need to remove those barriers to get them the right services. I also tell residents anybody can refer to a medical diagnostic, which is a really nice thing. Families can request this. Any members of the IFSP team service coordinators, even you as the physicians in training, even you as a doctor can make the recommendation for a medical diagnostic clinic too if you have suspicion for an underlying diagnosis. And these multidisciplinary clinics are really the best way to evaluate young children. And I say that because children's development at a young age is so, sometimes so enmeshed. If there's a communication problem, it causes cognitive issues, it causes behavioral issues. And so having a team assessing a child from all different angles and different viewpoints can be so helpful to put all the pieces together for an assessment. So I really encourage all of our children, if they're concerned when they're under 3 years old, to go through the early intervention process and go into the medical diagnostic clinic so that we can have this full and thorough assessment and all the care coordination that goes along with early intervention. So, I know that was a lot. Hopefully that was a good introduction. Okay, and I think that's
so to participate in the medical diagnostic clinic, a child has to be in early intervention. So sometimes, right, I mean, we would get a call at the hospital like, I want my child to participate in this clinic. They might be under 3 years old, but if you're not in early intervention, it's not available yet. So there's like some quick, get an evaluation through early intervention, get qualified, and then come back and come to that clinic. And it's only available until 3 years old.
Right, right.
Do you want to speak to what happens if it's over 3?
After 3 years old, it becomes very difficult to have an evaluation like you could get through the medical diagnostic clinic. It's very expensive, and so it would have to be through insurance at that point or out of pocket. But it's a several $1,000s assessment that is paid for under 3 by the state of Illinois. So they don't charge your insurance for the evaluation, and so there is a really critical time period that if a kiddo is in need of a medical diagnostic clinic, we've got to get it in before 3 years old.
It can take up to 3 to 6 months usually to get into a medical diagnostic.
This is true.
So, when we make referrals as therapists or whatever, talking to the service coordinators earlier is usually helpful. And then asking the service coordinators to potentially find multiple locations and kind of put out feelers to multiple locations so that you can kind of take whatever the first come, first serve. And then just making sure that you as a parent, you tell the service coordinator which location you've decided on so that the service coordinator can provide their appropriate paperwork and authorization to the correct location. I know that a lot of times we'll make the referral for a medical diagnostic will come, and by the time they can get in, they're already out of early intervention, and so we have to be, as therapists especially, we have to be very cognizant of that. It makes it a little bit challenging sometimes.
Well, I always err on the side of caution in that situation. If I have concerns, it may not be the most popular, way to think, but I would hate to miss that kid who could have benefited from this amazing comprehensive evaluation because I wanted to wait. So I do bring it up with families or with service coordinators and everybody on the team earlier, because then we can always put your name on that waiting list and you can always take it off if you don't have these concerns when they come to your name, but you can't go back in time. So do you want to speak to how it worked for you for your referral process?
So when my son first entered EI, he was like, I think I called it like 15 months old. Then we got all the therapists and everyone on board when he was around like 17 or 18 months old. And there were some whisperings among like this kid needs medical diagnostic. And I was fine, I was all for it. My husband was a little more apprehensive, but same thing like you just said, you can always take your name off if you don't have the concerns anymore, but you cannot go back in time, so I explained that. And I called in November, and then the next available was June, the end of June. So then you know, time came, yes, we still had these concerns, so we, went to the, appointment.
So you heard from the therapist that
Yes.
they were talking, or they included you, or how
Oh,
did
yeah, they
the whole
kind of-
referral go?
Oh, okay, so, one of the therapists told another therapist, and then that therapist told me that that's what, like, oh, you know, like, this therapist said that, that she thinks Evan needs this evaluation, and I said, oh, I said, I kind of think so too.
Okay.
So I guess, I don't think that's, a common way that it happens, probably.
It's hard, I mean, you can speak for as a therapist on a team, it's hard to
It
make.
depends on
Both ways.
what level of acceptance the family is.
Well, it would be ideal, the way you said, just
To do
talk
it
to
as a
parents, tell them, let's sign up for it, and when we have no concern, we can always take him or her off the list. But there is a group of parents, when you have to work on it, and work on it, you cannot
And get them prepared
sometimes
for-
get them prepared for it.
Even considering evaluations.
And sometimes they are for it, and then last moment they pull off. You have.
Yeah. I think the
different
initial
situations.
referral is one of the hardest things,
Yeah.
because it's a team decision where a parent is part of the team, and in theory, that works really well, but with phone calls and emails and different people coming at different times unless it's at that meeting, you know, where everyone's there, it's really hard to like discuss it as a team, you know? So it usually is like, well, I had this conversation with mom, and now I better call the
Yeah.
service coordinator, and let's make sure we're all on the same page, but it is a little more just logistic.
Yeah, and I do feel like because I was a little more open to the idea, that I think they, you know, she felt comfortable telling me this, and I was on board with it. But I could see how if somebody was a little more reluctant about it, that it could be difficult to bring up, for sure.
How about you, Sam?
So Parker, so we actually got the referral from our neurologist. And then I called the service coordinator and asked if we could have one. I was a service coordinator myself, so I knew the whole process. So I was like, all right, I want this. And yeah, she knows, I don't know how she puts up with me, but it's fine. But so she she was like, where do you wanna go? And I did my research and everything, and I think we asked for it in March and we got the appointment late November. So it's really a long time. In fact, I had scheduled another medical diagnostic when I was there a year ago, and we have one in December now, and so I just didn't even realize it, and I'm like, I'm not even gonna change my, like the appointment or anything, so anyways, okay, so our neurologist was unsure about Parker because of his diagnosis, because a lot of kids with infantile spasms usually kind of demonstrate autistic behaviors with their sensory issues and speech delays and whatever is going on. So we just felt it was best to get more information. I love information and anything that'll help him. So, and we had a feeling that autism was kind of on the table. So that's kind of, where we were at with that.
So, one of the things that I think a lot of people ask is just how do you get kind of how the referral works, but how then, once you have the referral, how do you go forward and move on with the medical diagnostic? So this is kind of where we put it down on a PowerPoint so that you can take it home and kind of peruse it and have reminders. So talking to your service coordinator, they're the ones who are going to do the authorizations. I think a lot of families like to talk to their therapists first and get the therapist's perspective also. As a therapist, I think that we have a really strong relationship with a lot of our families, and it's helpful to kind of have that support. And then, like I said, the service coordinators will reach out to different sites or ask you which site you would prefer. And then some families I know will call the location, but I've also heard that some of the locations will call the family cell schedule. So I think it kind of depends on where you're going as to which way it's going to work. And then making sure your service coordinator knows which place you're going to so that all the paperwork can go to the right location. I think that is really important to make sure. Most service coordinators will do it anyways, but asking the service coordinators to make sure that they send the most recent reports to the medical diagnostic team so that they have the most up-to-date information. I personally have never gotten a call from a medical diagnostic team asking me what has happened, but I know that they've reviewed reports that I've written. So I think that's always nice to have.
Can I just say one more thing? And also the authorization is a huge piece, because that's how they pay for, or that's how it's all covered. And when we went, it was like, we got there, and I thought everything was set up, and I talked to my service coordinator, and she sent everything, but they misplaced the authorization, and we couldn't start on time. And so just making sure everything is in place before you get there, because it is such an anxiety-provoking situation for you, your significant other, and your child, and all of that. So just making sure it's all in place.
So kind of piggybacking on that, so when you went, what did you do to help prepare? What did you bring with you? What did you do to kind of help prepare yourself mentally to go, physically to go?
Yeah, I brought food, which was helpful for him. I brought his favorite toys. I was aware of what they do, so I was okay, but my husband was just like, what is going on? Yeah, I mean, there wasn't really much. And we also had to fill out a pretty extensive questionnaire. It was like 20 pages of just